They were the kind of filmmakers who didn't just make movies, they shaped memories. And when tragedy struck, it shattered one of them in a way no camera could ever capture. Steven Spielberg and Rob Reiner, two towering figures in filmmaking, two brilliant directors with completely different creative voices, yet bound by the same deep, unshakable love for cinema. Where Spielberg mastered the art of immersive, haunting thrillers that pulled audiences into worlds of wonder and fear, Reiner ruled the realm of comedy, crafting films filled with laughter, warmth, and genuine human emotion. Their paths crossed often at industry gatherings where conversations flowed easily and admiration was exchanged with sincere smiles and heartfelt praise. There was comfort in those encounters, the quiet understanding that comes when two masters recognize one another. Because of that closeness, the news of Rob's tragic death hit Spielberg like a sudden, unbearable blow. It wasn't just shocking, it was paralyzing. Spielberg was left stunned, heartbroken to the point of tears, as memories of his friend's bright energy and infectious cheer instantly transformed into something painful and irreversible. What made the loss even harder to process was how recent their last joyful moment had been, how alive Rob still felt in Spielberg's mind. Just 2 months earlier, Spielberg vividly remembered standing beside Rob at a party, watching his face light up as he spoke with excitement and relief. Rob shared, almost bursting with pride, that his son Nick had completely overcome addiction and had returned home to live with the family. It wasn't a casual update, it was a victory, a hard-won miracle. Spielberg could see it clearly, the pure happiness written across his expression. It was the kind of joy that didn't need explanation, the kind that radiated from someone who believed the worst was finally behind him. That night, the two filmmakers talked the way they always did, drifting naturally into conversations about future film projects, new ideas, and stories still waiting to be told. They imagined possibilities, laughed freely, and dreamed aloud, unaware that time was already closing in, quietly and without mercy. But the ending was not one anyone could have imagined. In a cruel twist beyond comprehension, it was Nick who took Rob's life. What followed was no longer just a tragedy, it became a devastation so dark and incomprehensible, it tore through a family in ways no screenplay could ever contain. For Steven Spielberg, it wasn't merely the loss of a fellow director or even a close friend. It was a real-life horror, more heartbreaking, more shocking, and more shattering than any story he had ever brought to the screen. Hollywood didn't just wake up to bad news that morning, it woke up to silence. On December 14th, 2025, the industry seemed to stop breathing as word spread with terrifying speed. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, were gone forever. The shock hit hard across studios, sets, and living rooms around the world. But for Steven Spielberg, the loss cut far deeper than headlines or tributes could ever explain. Almost immediately, Spielberg broke his silence. In a rare moment of public vulnerability, he stepped before the media, paused, let out a quiet sigh, and spoke from a place of unmistakable pain. Rob was not just a colleague, he said softly. He was a friend, a companion on a cinematic journey that I deeply cherish. There was no polish in his delivery, no attempt to steady the emotion. His voice carried the weight of genuine grief, each word sounding as though it had to be lifted from somewhere deep inside him. Spielberg made it clear this wasn't just a loss for Hollywood, it was a loss for anyone who believed in storytelling that came from the heart. A talent like Rob, he said, continuing, someone with the rare ability to connect people through every film he made, will never be repeated. As he spoke, his eyes betrayed the sadness he was trying to contain. His voice softened even more as memories surfaced. Long conversations, shared ideas, creative debates, and quiet moments between two filmmakers who loved cinema, not for fame, but for its power to move the human soul. Spielberg recalled the very first time he met Rob Reiner, back when they were young, driven, and overflowing with ambition. I remember Rob back then, full of dreams, yet always humble. He described Rob's extraordinary gift, the ability to step inside a character so completely that audiences felt they were living the story alongside them. As he spoke, his hands slowly tightened, as if he were trying to hold on to something precious that was slipping away. When the discussion turned to Rob Reiner's body of work, Spielberg's composure visibly faltered. He created stories that made people laugh, cry, and reflect, he said. He was living proof that filmmaking isn't just art, it's a way to connect people. Each sentence lingered in the air, heavy with admiration and respect. Listeners didn't just hear Spielberg's words, they felt them. Rob Reiner wasn't simply the director behind The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and Stand By Me. He was the storyteller who gave audiences joy and laughter while quietly teaching timeless lessons about friendship, love, and the complicated beauty of growing up. With visible sorrow, Spielberg reflected on what Rob left behind, an extraordinary legacy that will continue to speak to generations yet to come. But this sudden and tragic departure, he said, leaves all of us feeling empty. In the days that followed, Spielberg reached out privately to the Reiner family, offering his deepest condolences. Then, in a public message shared with the world, he wrote, quote, "I am deeply saddened by the passing of Rob and Michelle," end quote. It was a simple sentence, but behind it lived decades of friendship, shared dreams, and a loss so profound that even the greatest storyteller in Hollywood struggled to find the words. Before the world knew him as a legend, Steven Spielberg knew him as something else entirely. Rob Reiner was more than a remarkable filmmaker. He was a loyal friend, an extraordinary collaborator, and a true artist in every sense of the word. With his passing, Hollywood didn't just lose a familiar face, it lost a guiding light. A gifted storyteller whose work quietly slipped into living rooms, into memories, into hearts. Millions laughed because of him. Millions felt seen because of him. But behind the applause, the red carpets, and the legendary career, there was a side of Rob that almost no one ever witnessed. In the next part of his reflection, Steven Spielberg revealed a memory he had never shared publicly before, a private story, a painful one, and a story that exposes one of Rob Reiner's darkest and most human struggles. Spielberg remembers it with unsettling clarity. It was a cozy evening at the home of a mutual friend in Hollywood just a few years ago, the kind of gathering that felt safe and familiar. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, old film stories floated through the air, memories exchanged by people who had grown up together inside the industry. It should have been perfect, but something felt wrong. Across the room, standing quietly in the corner, was Rob Reiner, alone, a glass of wine in his hand. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't talking, he looked exhausted, distant in a way Spielberg had never seen before. There was a heaviness clinging to him, as if he were carrying a weight too heavy to set down. Steven noticed immediately. He walked over, gently patted his friend on the shoulder, and said, "It's been a long time. You don't look too well. Is something wrong?" Rob didn't answer. He just stared at Steven for a long moment. Then he sighed, deep, slow, and motioned for him to follow. They stepped out onto the balcony, away from the noise, away from the crowd, away from the forced smiles. That's when Rob finally opened up. "Rob told me that Nick was going through serious difficulties," Steven later recalled. "He was lost in addiction, conflicts, relapses, disappointment after disappointment, piling up without mercy. Rob wasn't speaking as a filmmaker or a public figure. He was speaking as a father who felt completely powerless. He could hear it in his voice, feel it in every word. This wasn't frustration, this was pain, the kind only a parent can know. Rob tried to smile once or twice, as if hoping it might hide what he was feeling. It didn't. The weight was unmistakable, the fear, the heartbreak. Then Rob went even deeper. "Steven," he said quietly, "you know Nick is deeply addicted. It started when he was a teenager. Heroin, cocaine, one rehab after another." Each sentence landed heavier than the last. "Michelle and I tried everything, the best treatment centers, keeping him at home, watching him closely, but he keeps relapsing." Rob stared into the darkness beyond the balcony, eyes unfocused, thoughts somewhere far away. "I made the film Being Charlie with him," Rob continued. "I hoped it would help him heal. I hoped it would bring our family closer. For a while, it worked. He stayed clean. But now it's happening all over again." And then came the words Steven would never forget. "I'm terrified, Steven, terrified that one day I'll lose him forever." Steven listened carefully, choosing his response with care, trying to steady his friend. "You've done everything a father could do," Steven said softly. "Nick is lucky to have you and Michelle." But Rob shook his head, his voice cracked. "Sometimes we're so desperate, we listen to doctors instead of listening to our son. I just want to save him, but the more I try, the more powerless I feel." They sat there in silence after that, wine untouched, the party noise fading into something distant and unreal. Steven didn't interrupt. He just listened as Rob poured out his heart, talking about a son he loved deeply and a future that terrified him more than anything else. And then, time moved on. Years passed. By 2025, that night still hadn't left Spielberg's mind. It resurfaced vividly when he last saw Rob Reiner in October of that year at the Governor's Awards of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Los Angeles. It was their final meeting. And now, looking back, Steven understands something he didn't fully grasp then, just how much that quiet moment on a balcony revealed. Not about a legend, not about a filmmaker, but about a father standing in the dark, carrying a fear he never stopped living with. What Steven Spielberg remembered most wasn't the speeches, the lights, or the famous faces. It was Rob Reiner's smile. It was a formal evening gathering, an elegant night filled with stars and veteran directors, where laughter floated through the air and nostalgia clung to every conversation. Around the room, stories were traded like priceless relics, each carrying echoes of Hollywood's golden age, back when cinema felt almost magical. As Steven Spielberg stepped into the grand hall, his eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. Then he saw him, Rob. From across the room, Rob Reiner stood smiling brightly, relaxed and animated, deep in conversation with a small circle of old friends. There was something unmistakably warm about him that night, something that caught Steven's attention immediately. Spielberg weaved his way through the crowd, and the instant their eyes met, both men broke into wide, familiar smiles. They embraced tightly, patting each other on the back like longtime brothers who had shared countless journeys through the same unpredictable industry. "Rob, you look great," Spielberg said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "How have you been lately?" he added cheerfully. Rob threw his head back and laughed, a loud, heartfelt laugh that made his eyes light up in a way Steven hadn't seen in a long time. Leaning in slightly, as if sharing something precious, Rob said, "Steven, you wouldn't believe it. Nick is home now. He's doing much better. He's been clean for several months. He's even started doing small jobs and talking to us normally again." Hearing this, a deep warmth spread through Spielberg's chest. He remembered the quiet moments when Rob had confided his fears, the exhaustion, the sleepless nights spent worrying about his son's addiction. Steven placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. That's wonderful, Rob. You and Michelle have persevered for so many years. Now, hope is finally here. I'm truly happy for you. For a while after that, the two men lingered at the edge of the ceremony, talking the way old friends do when time briefly slows down. They spoke about new films, young actors, and how the industry seemed to reinvent itself with every generation. The conversation was light, familiar, comforting. Two filmmakers sharing a rare moment of calm in a demanding world. Yet more than anything else, Steven couldn't stop thinking about Rob's smile. There was something different about it that night. A rare optimism, a sense of relief. Later, Spielberg would reflect that he was genuinely happy for his friend. After years of anxiety and quiet pain, Rob seemed at last to have found a small pocket of peace. Then Steven's voice would soften, his tone shifting as memory gave way to sorrow. Who could have imagined that just a few months later, in December, devastating news would strike like thunder from a clear sky? Spielberg still vividly remembered the shock that surged through him when he read about Rob's family tragedy. All that fragile hope just beginning to glow seemed to vanish in an instant. In the days that followed Rob's passing, Spielberg found himself returning to The Princess Bride, one of his favorite films. As the familiar scenes played out, he smiled through tears. When the iconic line, "As you wish," filled the room, it hit him harder than ever before. In that quiet moment, he whispered to himself, "Rob, you lived fully, and we will remember you forever." Spielberg later shared words that came straight from the heart. "Rest in peace, my friend. Michelle and you have left behind a legacy of love and creativity that nothing can erase. Hollywood feels darker today, but Rob Reiner's films will continue to shine." Anyone who truly loves Hollywood cinema understands that Rob Reiner and Steven Spielberg were not the kind of friends who spoke every day or shared constant personal moments. Yet, within the film industry, they were colleagues bound by deep mutual respect and a shared devotion to storytelling and film development. Both men grew up within Jewish backgrounds and were shaped by artistic families. Rob Reiner gravitated toward intimate, humanistic stories, films that explored everyday life, personal relationships, and inner conflict. Spielberg, on the other hand, was drawn to epic narratives, emotionally charged blockbusters, and experiences that reached across generations. Different voices, different styles, but united by cinema, and by a quiet respect that lasted a lifetime. They shared the spotlight countless times, side by side at glittering award ceremonies, leaning into each other's thoughts at film seminars, and appearing together at high-profile events where the world watched every word, every gesture. On one such occasion, Rob Reiner didn't hold back. He spoke candidly about Steven Spielberg, saying that Spielberg's almost supernatural ability to fuse raw human emotion with breathtaking visuals was something every director, no matter how seasoned, should study, should aspire to master. Spielberg, in turn, never hesitated to return that admiration. He often spoke of Reiner's rare talent, the uncanny way he could dive deep into the human soul and pull stories that didn't just entertain, but reached inside audiences, quietly stirring something they couldn't explain. When Spielberg today speaks of Rob Reiner with reverence, it's more than respect. It's the acknowledgement of a fellow master, a director who gave everything to the art he loved. But it raises a question that has haunted fans and filmmakers alike for decades. What makes Steven Spielberg so extraordinary? How did he learn to bend light, sound, and silence into experiences that don't just play on screen, but carve themselves into memory, emotional, permanent, unforgettable? To understand, we must step beyond the camera and into the life that shaped the storyteller himself. Steven Allen Spielberg was born on December 18, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a family of Eastern European Jewish descent. The eldest child and only son, he grew up with 3 younger sisters in a household where intellect and artistry intertwined. His father, Arnold Spielberg, was a brilliant electrical engineer, immersed in room-filling computers that seemed almost magical in their complexity. His mother, Leah, was a pianist with a warmth that could fill any room, her music weaving through Steven's earliest memories. Yet, childhood stability eluded him. Arnold's work demanded constant relocations, and Steven's life became a series of packed boxes, new houses, unfamiliar streets, and strangers masquerading as neighbors. Just as he began to feel rooted, everything shifted again. But in that constant upheaval, he learned something crucial: how to observe, how to watch life unfold from the edges, and slowly, how to find his place in a world that never stayed still. Years later, Steven would reflect on that restless upbringing, saying, "Every time we moved, I felt like I lost a part of myself. But it was also that experience that taught me how to observe, how to listen, and slowly find my place in the world." That need to watch, to absorb, would quietly shape the storytelling instincts that made him legendary. At 6, a trip to the movies changed everything. Watching Cecil DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth, young Steven was mesmerized. The danger, the spectacle, the joy, it felt real, immediate, alive. As the credits rolled, he clutched his mother's hand and whispered, "I want to make things that scare people and make them feel joy like that." Leah smiled, brushing back his hair. "Then you must first learn how to tell stories, my dear Stevie." That advice became a compass. When he turned 12, Arnold gifted him an 8mm camera, a simple device that would quietly rewrite Steven's future. Almost overnight, he began filming everything: family camping trips, backyard adventures, even elaborate toy train crashes he staged with meticulous care. He cast his sisters in roles, directing them with authority. "You play the victims. I'll save everyone." These shaky reels were more than child's play. They were Steven learning the language of fear and wonder, chaos and order. They were his first attempts at turning anxiety into story, uncertainty into spectacle, imagination into something that could grip an audience. In those moments, long before Hollywood would take notice, Steven Spielberg was already crafting the alchemy that would one day enchant the world. The world outside Steven Spielberg's schoolyard was harsh, unforgiving, and utterly unkind. In 1957, when his family moved to Phoenix, Arizona, Steven found himself one of the only Jewish children in the neighborhood, a label that made him a target. He later recalled the relentless bullying, the punches, the whispered insults, and the suffocating shame of being singled out. "He always wondered why I was different," he confessed, his young voice carrying the weight of isolation that no child should endure. But instead of breaking him, those moments of exclusion sharpened his eyes. While others played, Steven watched. Every sneer, every rejection became a lesson in human nature, the light, the darkness, and everything in between. These early brushes with loneliness and empathy would later beat at the very heart of his storytelling. By the age of 13, Spielberg had already turned his inner world into film. His 40-minute war story, Escape to Nowhere, won a prize in a youth film competition. By 16, he was chasing bigger dreams, investing every penny he had into a 2-hour sci-fi epic called Firelight. One evening, the film played to a tiny audience in a local theater, just a few dozen people, but to Steven, it felt monumental. Quietly, he told himself, "One day, people will line up to watch my films." That summer, during a family camping trip, Steven accidentally captured a secret on film. His mother, Leah, holding hands with his father's best friend, Bernie Adler, by the campfire. Shocked, he turned off the camera, locking away the secret for 3 years. By 1965, his parents' divorce left deep scars. His father, Arnold, absorbed the blame to protect Leah, and Steven, now living in California with Arnold, confronted him in raw, bitter anger. Dad destroyed this family. Arnold said nothing, only nodded, resigned. That wound simmered for 15 years, feeding Steven's understanding of human complexity, the beauty, the cruelty, and the heartbreak that would later infuse films like The Fabelmans. Yet, despite the pain, Steven's talent refused to be contained. His first breakthrough came in 1968 with Amblin, a short film that stunned Universal Studios executives. Suddenly, the boy who once filmed in secret knew his hobby had become a calling. He dropped out of college, worked as an unpaid intern, and sneaked into empty offices to edit and create. Every hidden hour, every secret project was a step toward the vision that had burned in him since Firelight, a future where audiences wouldn't just watch his films, they would line up for them, spellbound, unable to look away. At just 22 years old, Steven Spielberg stunned Hollywood by signing a long-term contract with Universal in 1969, instantly making history as the youngest director ever to land such a major deal. For many, this was just the beginning of a legendary career that would reshape modern cinema. Spielberg cut his teeth in television, directing episodes of Night Gallery and Columbo, but it was the 1971 TV film Duel that truly put him on the map. The story was deceptively simple, a man relentlessly pursued by a mysterious truck, but Spielberg's genius transformed it into edge-of-your-seat suspense. Audiences were gripped, critics raved, and doors to the big studios swung wide open, setting the stage for his first theatrical feature, The Sugarland Express in 1974. Then came 1975, and everything changed. Jaws wasn't just a movie, it was a phenomenon. A giant shark terrorizing a summer beach town became the stuff of legend, and the production itself was famously chaotic. Spielberg later confessed, "There were moments when I thought the shark would eat me before we even finished filming." Against all odds, the film roared into theaters, earning over $470 million worldwide, shattering box office records, and essentially inventing the summer blockbuster. More than fame, Jaws earned Spielberg a Best Picture nomination and cemented his status as a cinematic powerhouse. From there, Spielberg's career took flight with films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., proving he wasn't just a master of thrills, he was a storyteller capable of evoking wonder, warmth, and profound emotion. Yet, his brilliance wasn't limited to fantasy and sci-fi. He tackled history and human suffering with the same deft hand, delivering morally complex masterpieces like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan, films that forced audiences to confront the darkest corners of humanity, while finding hope and courage within. In 1994, Spielberg co-founded DreamWorks, solidifying his role not just as a filmmaker, but as a kingmaker of modern cinema. The studio churned out hits from Gladiator to Transformers, while Spielberg himself continued to dominate the medium well into the 2000s, with films like Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, and The Fabelmans, a deeply personal, semi-autobiographical reflection on his own childhood, a window into the man behind the camera. Yet, behind the blockbusters and awards, Spielberg has always cherished privacy. His personal life is quieter, but no less compelling. He met his first wife, actress Amy Irving, during auditions for Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1976. After years of dating, they married in 1985 and welcomed their son, Max Samuel, on June 13th that same year, a poignant reminder that even amidst cinematic triumphs, Spielberg's journey has always been anchored by family, love, and a deeply human story behind the legend. However, just 4 years later, in 1989, Steven Spielberg and Amy Irving divorced. The separation made headlines not just for the personal heartbreak, but also because of the enormous settlement, reportedly around $100 million paid to Amy. Despite the split, the two maintained a surprisingly amicable relationship, united by their shared dedication to their son, Max. Amy once reflected, "We did what was best for Max." Soon after the divorce, Spielberg's life took a new turn when he began a relationship with Kate Capshaw, the actress who had portrayed Willie Scott in Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Doom, the 1984 blockbuster Spielberg himself directed. Their first meetings were during the audition process, where Spielberg was immediately captivated. He later recalled, "I watched Kate's audition tape and thought she was exactly right. Kate, ever with a sense of humor, once joked, 'I never expected that a role full of action and screaming would bring me the man of my life.'" Filming took them from the lush landscapes of Sri Lanka to various locations in the United States, and during this time, their connection deepened. They shared meals, conversations about films, life, and dreams, but Spielberg was still with Amy Irving, so his feelings toward Kate remained professional. It wasn't until after his divorce in 1989 that things shifted. That year, Spielberg and Kate began dating officially and soon moved in together. Kate later explained, "We had grown close on set, but we had to wait for the right moment for things to become serious." Before their wedding, Kate converted to Judaism, embracing Spielberg's heritage, and in 1991, they celebrated their union with both a civil ceremony and an Orthodox ceremony. Spielberg reflected, "When I married Kate, I rediscovered my pride in my Jewish heritage." Their bond quickly grew into a rich, blended family. Kate brought her daughter Jessica from a previous marriage. Max had Jessica from his marriage to Amy Irving, and together they welcomed more children, both biological and adopted, creating one of Hollywood's most famous blended families. Their marriage has endured for over 34 years, a rarity in an industry known for short-lived relationships. They often appear together at events, with Kate stepping back from acting to focus on her family and her art, particularly painting. Their children, Jessica, Max, Theo, Sasha, Sawyer, Michaela, and Destry, have all grown into their own paths. Max is a game director and filmmaker. Jessica followed in her mother's footsteps as an actress, and Sawyer and Destry pursued careers in entertainment. Michaela made headlines in 2020 when she announced her work in adult films, emphasizing it was her personal choice, and her family's support was unwavering. Through the highs, the lows, and the Hollywood spotlight, Spielberg and Kate's story stands as a testament to love, patience, and building a family on shared values and mutual respect. Even amidst the dazzle of Hollywood premieres, flashing cameras, and standing ovations, Steven Spielberg's heart has always had a quieter, deeper rhythm: family. But his devotion didn't stop at his own home. On set, Spielberg often became more than a director. He was a mentor, a protector, a guide for the young actors under his wing. Take Drew Barrymore, for example. Just a child when she starred in E.T., she needed more than direction. She needed someone to believe in her, to hold her hand through the pressures of fame. She needed a support system, and I was there. It was a responsibility, but also a joy, Spielberg once recalled. His patience, his gentle guidance, and his quiet encouragement weren't mere professional courtesy. They mirrored how he raised his own children, with unwavering love, understanding, and a steady hand that never forced, only nurtured. Time has flown, but Spielberg's connection to his family remains unshakable. His children have grown, carving their own paths in life, yet the bond he cultivated endures. For Spielberg, family isn't just a refuge, it's the heartbeat of his creativity. The emotions, conflicts, and joys of family life feed directly into the stories he tells. "Family is the reason I make films," he once said. "Every story I tell comes from what I've learned about love and responsibility." At 79, most might slow down, but not Spielberg. He's still brimming with energy, diving into ambitious projects like Disclosure Day and sequels to some of his most beloved films. "I've never felt tired," he admits, his eyes sparkling with the same excitement that first drew him to a camera decades ago. Every film for him is a new chance to explore emotion, wonder, and human connection. A passion that has turned him into a living emblem of perseverance, creativity, and storytelling. Even his personal health reflects his dedication. A noticeable weight shift from roughly 95 kilos to around 82 signals a renewed focus on longevity and well-being. Spielberg knows that to keep creating, his mind and body must remain strong and resilient, ready to endure the demands of his craft. In every sense, Steven Spielberg exemplifies a life fully lived, driven by love, fueled by curiosity, and guided by an unquenchable passion for telling stories that touch the human heart. Age may slow the rhythm of life, but for Steven Spielberg, it has never slowed the pulse of creativity. The legendary director has often confided to close collaborators that his imagination is his ultimate elixir of youth. "I feel fortunate," he once said, "to still see the light in every project, to still be able to tell stories the way I want." For Spielberg, it's the perfect blend of passion and discipline that fuels not only an energetic pace, but also a razor-sharp mind even under the relentless pressures and towering expectations of Hollywood. In an industry notorious for its intensity and unforgiving pace, maintaining both physical vitality and mental clarity at 79 is nothing short of extraordinary. Yet Spielberg proves time and again that age cannot dim the desire to create, to craft stories that echo across generations. This truth became painfully real following the tragic passing of Rob Reiner on the 14th of this month. Spielberg openly shared his grief, revealing the deep regret and sorrow of losing a friend, a collaborator, and a cinematic visionary whose influence reached far beyond the silver screen. Through Spielberg's reflections, we glimpse the soul of an artist confronting life's fragility and the profound ache of personal loss. Rob Reiner's passing, especially after the devastating loss of Nick Reiner, reminds us that even Hollywood's brightest lights are not immune to heartbreak. It forces a poignant question. Can an industry often criticized for coldness and cutthroat ambition still hold space for empathy, compassion, and the human connection that Rob embodied so effortlessly? In honoring this loss, Spielberg reminds us that the true heart of storytelling is not in awards, fame, or accolades. It's in the people whose lives we touch. His tribute to Reiner is a powerful reminder that at the core of every story are human connections, the threads that make both life and cinema meaningful. We extend our deepest condolences to the Reiner family, celebrating Rob as a filmmaker whose artistry and humanity left an unforgettable mark on audiences everywhere. If this story moved you, share your thoughts, memories, or reflections about Rob Reiner and Steven Spielberg in the comments. Subscribe to explore more emotionally rich film stories, deep dives into Hollywood legends, and tributes that preserve the legacies of the storytellers who continue to shape the art we love. Every comment and every subscription is a way to honor these memories and celebrate the creators who inspire us all.